Here we go. So, welcome to this session of the Black Family Home Educators' second annual teach-in. This particular session is focused on the BFHES new book that's forthcoming. It's in production. It's coming from our book series. So this will be the first book from our book series, coming from Information Age Publishing. The book series is titled Contemporary Perspectives on Black Homeschooling. I am Dr. Cheryl Fields-Smith, one of the co-founders of the Black Family Homeschool Educators and Scholars organization. And I have with me today Drs. Kathaleena Monds and Dr. Meca Williams-Johnson, who are two people who contributed chapters to our book. And so we're going to talk about their chapters, we'll talk about their homeschooling experiences, and we'll dive into a few other things. Please feel free to type questions as they come up in the chat at any time, and we will this will just proceed. So welcome, Kathaleena and Meca. I am so happy to see you, and thank you for being here today. Let's jump in and talk about your chapter. The title of the book is Homeschooling Black Children in the U.S., Theory, Practice, and Popular Culture. And so let's talk about your chapters, whoever wants to go first. I should say, let me say on the outset, what's interesting about the panel is we have Kathaleena, who represents a veteran homeschooler. She's actually graduated children through the homeschool process. And then Meca, who started recently. And so it's nice to have both perspectives represented on the panel. And whatever questions you want to pose of each other, like, let's just chat about this work. So who wants to go first?
Meca, I'll yield to you.
Well, thanks. I'm trying to find my mute button, but I'm still one of those. And so the title of the book, I think, is absolutely outstanding. It's very popular now to talk about homeschooling and what people are trying to do to make sure that their children are still receiving some form of formal education, given all that we've had to go through with COVID precautions. And so, you know, many families are talking about being homeschoolers, but I think those veteran homeschoolers really know that there's a difference between the homeschooling and designing your own curriculum and being the person held totally accountable for homeschooling your kid, rather than what we see now more with the online learning. So I am fairly new to being a homeschool mom on my own, although my kids are 14 and 7. So I had what we would call an 8th grader, or a young person who's working on curriculum design for some of those students who would be in 8th grade, your Algebra 1, and what we have here in Georgia is your Georgia history and those kinds of things. However, I've known more about homeschooling, but was very hesitant because of accountability issues and having been a teacher. So I was a teacher for several years before working on my graduate degree. And even though I loved the idea of homeschooling, it frightened me. It really frightened me. And so, like I said, the term is popular and catchy, and a lot of people say that they're doing it, but I don't know that I actually would give them the authentic title as being a real homeschooler, or what I would determine is what's a real homeschooler. That person being the one who bears or shoulders the entire responsibility and accountability for their kids' environment and learning. And I guess, you know, my perspective may be small, but I do think it's a great experience. It offers a lot of freedom. Mm-hmm. But even within that freedom, I saw some of my own limitations and what I think might be cool might not be the best thing for my kid. And I don't know that I wanted, at the time, I didn't know that I wanted to take the risk with that. And it's certain risks that you take with any opportunity that you decide to do. But now with homeschooling, I think that I feel it's a better opportunity than what we see happening in many of our schools today. It's something where you should really consider it a true viable option and take the risk.
Well, thank you. So I'll provide some support to the question at hand. For starters, Dr. Fields-Smith, I want to applaud you as well as Dr. Khadijah Ali for your stellar work in the Black homeschooling space, both as a researcher, certainly as a advocate of the work, and I'm delighted to be in a part of today's conversation and to be in your midst, and I appreciate the opportunity. So let me share a little. I think the question on the hand is kind of, what is our chapter, the book about, and maybe how did we get to this journey? And then there's one thing, Dr. Williams-Johnson, I think I'm going to give you a little bit pushback on as it pertains to your concept of authentic homeschooling. So I will start with this quote that I heard last year at the teach-in, and Dr. LaNasir James, who was a participant, she put a quote up and she said, "Don't question your ability to teach your child. Question putting your child into a system that left you feeling incapable of teaching your child." And I'm going to start there because I've been homeschooling since 1997. And again, I applaud you, Dr. Fields-Smith, for your work, because in 1997, when we started homeschooling, I, like most researchers, like most parents who want to do something new for their child, we begin to start researching, like, what is homeschooling? What does it look like? And at that time, and I'm going back to you, Dr. Fields-Smith, your book and your book series could not be better timed. But in 1997, when we were looking to homeschool our children, there were probably about 3 to 5 books on the market for Black homeschoolers. And literally, I still have those books on my shelf. And those 3 books, and I'll share throughout our conversation today a bit about the work in those particular books that helped us to really say, this is something that we can do. But needless to say, to your point, and I'll give you the authors now. One author was by David and Mickey Colfax. It's a book that they wrote entitled Homeschooling for Excellence. A second book was by Grace Llewellyn entitled Freedom Challenge, African American Homeschoolers. And that was written in 1996. And then a third book was by Paula Penn Nabrett entitled Morning by Morning, How We Homeschooled Our Ivy League, our African American sons to Ivy League. Those 3 books, spanning 1988, 1996 to 2003, were the books that were kind of the canon that we used to know, okay, is this something that we can do? Is this something that's feasible and possible? Fast forward that, 25, almost 20, 22, 23 years later, Dr. Fields-Smith and Khadijah Ali are now really highlighting this really critical work to have the need to have a space for scholarship and research in the homeschooling, Black homeschooling space. So the last thing I'll close with before we get into the conversation, to your comment, Dr. Meca Williams-Johnson, excuse me, I think that the authentic homeschooler is any parent who decides to take the necessary steps to educate their child at home. And whether it is you, like when we started in 97, it was just me and my husband and I, we were developing the unit studies. We were doing all of the heavy lifting. But one of the things we discovered as we homeschooled over time, it wasn't just about us, because as we had baby number 2 and 3 and 4, the older children started educating their peers. And so while some people may say, I'm no longer an authentic homeschooler because my older children are helping to do some of the schooling, we still consider ourselves an authentic homeschool family. In addition to that, as our kids became homeschool high schoolers, and by the way, for the listening audience, we have 4 children, all homeschooled K through 12, never stepping foot in a public school, however, or private or whatever. However, we do understand the value of getting them involved in, let's say, some of the distance learning opportunities that are available, because as they got older, they are certainly a lot more independent learners. And so they didn't need us to lay out lesson plans for them per se. I'll stop there.
That's really good. Let's jump into the chapters a little more deeply. Meca, with your chapter, what I appreciated as your editor is how vulnerable you made yourself in sharing the challenges with your own self-efficacy, meaning your own belief that you could homeschool your children. And what's really profound about it is that you are an educator. You were a teacher in a public school, and now you teach teachers and future teachers. And so your recent entrance into homeschooling left you with this self-efficacy. And you can just imagine someone that doesn't have your background in education also struggling with self-efficacy. So your willingness to open yourself up to that is such an invitation to, for people, a gift for people to read. What do you want the people who read your chapter in particular to walk away with?
Well, the first thing is, if they see me do it, then they can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. Okay. So there's no, it's what you see is what you get. And I want to just bring my whole self, my honest self, and describe the journey. Because to me, it's a continuous journey. So I still see us moving and going. And what Kathaleena said, and please call me Meca. I hope it's okay if I, say Kathaleena or call you Kathaleena, but it is, it's one of those things where it's not that you're going to get it all right all the time. And as you are discovering more about your kid and their learning style, what they prefer in their learning, it's not that it's one particular style, but what they seem to gravitate towards and manipulate well with information. Once you learn those things, everything else, I think, will fall into place. And being able, again, to just take risks. When we think of education, and I think for Black folks, especially some of us who are living in the rural South, we don't want to take risks with our kids' education. We know it's very little that we have, some opportunities towards having the time to really figure out, different learning styles and what works best for you. We just feel like we don't have that time. That's a luxury. But honestly, you get much more value out of the relationship, and the kids value their learning and opportunities when you do take that time. And so it's kind of getting through some of those, those misconceptions. And even in the term that I use, authentic, that may seem, that's my limited experience into homeschooling and what I believe authentic homeschoolers would look like. And Kathaleena, I'm familiar with what you were talking about in having to develop your own curriculum, but I didn't have to do that, or I didn't do that. I chose not to. But in my earlier opportunities and experiences in talking with homeschoolers, I had some experiences where we talked about those families who homeschool and they only outsourced for folks or different professionals to come in when either they couldn't teach certain topics like your geometries or sometimes the physical science, given the age of the student. So they felt somewhat uncomfortable with that. And so then saw it differently from the homeschooling being from the parent. But now we have a better, I think, or more open definition to understanding that schooling or the educational experience happening in the home. However it comes, either through distance learning or through outsourcing or from the parent, does contribute to the homeschool environment, and therefore is still what the family provides as authentic. Because either way it goes, learning is happening. The accountability still rests on the shoulders of the parent and the kid. And so we can still move forward from that. But again, I had a very strict definition of what authentic homeschooling was. And to some extent, I guess maybe I'm just old school. I still hold on to that, because even with what we get through distance learning, I still tweak it and make it my own.
Meca, I think you're onto something, and I let me hone in to your question as well, Dr. Fields-Smith. You mentioned, Meca and I are both in rural parts of the United States, and we're homeschooling. And I think, Meca, to your point, it kind of boils down to parents choosing, right? Parent choice. And when you are in certain parts of the United States, those choices are quite limited. And so in rural America, for example, we still have in South Georgia counties where the elementary, middle, and high schools in traditional schools are all in one building. And so that gives you the one choice that you have. And so sadly enough, if that district is a failing district, then that's all you have. And so I do think that it's important that we understand that, as we identify schooling for parents, it really does give parents choice. If there were three things I could say about the chapter that I wrote in the book, and Dr. Fields-Smith, it's really that. So the chapter that I wrote is what we call an autoethnography, and it really kind of came out of, I guess, the School of Anthropology and Sociology, but it does lend itself to the ability to kind of understand the culture of groups. And so if you look at our homeschool family over 20 plus years of time, what was it about that experience, that prolonged period of time, that was worth writing about, right? And so there were kind of three things that we thought about. One was community. The other was culture, and kind of freedom, if you will. And then I would say the third one is kind of, bottom up. I'll use that term loosely, but I'll tell you what I mean. So, as we were, as I was framing, I say we because Dr. Fields-Smith led a writing retreat as this kind of process leading up to the chapter completion. And so I'm saying we because it was certainly the efforts of the writing circles that really made it successful. Otherwise, who knows if I would have ever finished a chapter. But in terms of community, in rural America, one of the things as you think about homeschooling, you have to think about what we call kind of the geography of opportunity. That while we see homeschooling as this place, in the home, the reality is that it's really the being able to capitalize, if you will, on the resources around you. And I think in rural America, homeschooling parents have to work extra hard at that. And so part of the chapter that I write about is really how our Black and brown kids, were involved in the 4-H's and the Girl Scouts, and really digging deep into those organizations. 4-H is more than just having kids, work with animals. They have fantastic public speaking events. And in fact, my 15-year-old is at the state competition now. So that's one, community, right? The sense of community, the sense of kind of self-interest, but also being able to benefit others. The other thing that we had honed in on was freedom, right? This concept of freedom, because not only was it important for us to be able to choose, but we thought that people of color, if anybody on the planet could benefit the most from homeschooling, it certainly could be people of color, families of color. Because of course we can see this widening achievement gap and continuing to widen. So, I mean, again, what could we fail, right, in trying? And then the third pillar we thought about, as I was writing the book, was really this really importance of kind of bottom up engagement. So as parents, we decide to choose. 2, we understand this importance of individualized instruction, looking at each child differently, understanding each child really from the concept of abundance and not deficit. One of the things that really, I'll share this and I'll stop, that I had a conversation with another homeschool parent. And when she said this, it really resonated with me. And she said, when white students have a challenge in school, it's a problem. They're having a problem. But when Black children have a challenge in school, they are the problem. And I thought, whoa, that's pretty heavy. And so, yeah, we wanted to make sure as we look at community, freedom, and this notion of bottom-up engagement, is that we wanted to find a way to write our own story, if you will, through those three lenses. And so that's basically the framework for our chapter.
That's great. I love that you mentioned the writing retreats. I have to tell you, I have put at least 5 chapters in other people's books over my career as a professor. And not once did I get a chance to meet any of the other authors in the book. And I wanted our experience, because it's gifted to us by Information Age Publishing, but we get to run it the way we want to. And one of the things I wanted was to create a community of writers. And so let's talk about the experience that Dr. Khadijah and I created. It's a unique approach to publishing books because the Black homeschool community, particularly among researchers, is small. And I feel like one of my main purposes is to grow it. And I think for those of you that are listening that maybe you don't think you can write a book, and I also question this idea of what is research, what is knowledge. If we look at theories such as Black feminist theory, if we look at Dr. Cynthia Dillard's work, for example, the sacredness in our teaching and in our learning, that these types of frameworks give us power in terms of our experience. So our experience is knowledge. Our ability to name, so just the dialogue between Kathaleena and Meca earlier in terms of what is authentic schooling, we have the power to name and to self-name and to define. And by that same token, you all have the power to tell your story. I think it's very important to document the diversity that exists within the Black homeschool community, which this forthcoming book does. There are 14 chapters and they're all different from one another. And you can see the diversity among Black homeschooling within the text. But I think also this idea of understanding what works for our children. And there's so many different things that work for our children. It makes me wonder why the schools can't get themselves together to make it happen, because there's so many possibilities when you look at what you all are doing with your children to help them to be successful. And so we need more stories. I think the great, wonderful quantitative people, that's great. We need that. Those are large scale. You have people do surveys, but what it misses is the actual story. I love the story. Your stories are inspiring, and they're very important. So that said, Meca and Kathaleena, talk about the experience of writing the book with our book series.
So I also appreciate the opportunity, Cheryl. This has been absolutely amazing for you to use your time and capitalize on working with others to try to make sure that we capture what's happening within Black families, as well as take a look at the landscape, the educational landscape, and share some similarities between these families to say we've all seen, the discrepancy, the academic gaps, the issues with having schools listening to parent concerns, and understanding the value that parents bring to schools instead of looking at the Black child and the Black family as a problem or as a deficient person. And so bringing all of those stories to the forefront is very important. And I appreciate you for doing this great work, and Khadijah as well. And also, there's a fantastic idea for bringing the writers together, because you're right, I haven't had an opportunity ever to meet some of the people that contribute to one project, not a book, not an article, not a special issue. We don't get to see each other until you're at a conference somewhere. You're like, oh, I recognize your name. And so it's good to, to share in real time. And I think in terms of my writing, this piece within our group, I learned a lot from hearing others in their journey to know that the fear is real. It's everybody. Everybody has that particular fear in working with their kid, especially sometimes if you have, kids who may have different challenges that we're not altogether certain on how to solve, or that are not easily resolved. But again, as you said, the value of the parent working with that kid, and they see that kid in their abundance. And I love that. The abundance of what they bring instead of the deficit, and having the patience and just knowing that over time they'll get it. They'll get it. So it's just overcoming that fear. And I think for me, it was writing about it. I was able to say, okay, well, I'm not the only one who has that fear, but it's just naming it and talking about it in the phases of efficacy, and having that vicarious experience when you see someone else achieve, that makes you want to work harder and achieve as well. And the mastery experience. When you do achieve, then you feel more relieved. You're like, whoo, that was a risk. I'm glad I took it. But now that I see the fruits of my labor, I'm going to continue and move forward and be vigilant and probably share with others. So again, I thank you for the opportunity, but I learned more from writing and watching others, and we'll continue on this journey.
That's great.
So Meca, you're spot on to something. And Dr. Fields-Smith, there are a few things that I jotted down in my notes that I wanted to chat about in terms of the process. So I think one of the things that it did as we met to collaborate and work on our respective chapters is that it helped to validate the important role of our own voice. And when we started this conversation, I mentioned that as homeschoolers, we're either homeschool advocates, right? I consider myself an advocate for others. You're a practitioner, you're a teacher, you're doing it, or you're a researcher. And I must admit, of those three different titles, I always felt that there was a deficit, that there was something missing in my role as a researcher in this space until you pulled us together. And what I think that I remember during a few conversations we chatted about was decolonizing research. Because when we go through research methods, research qual, we're always taught that it has to be someone else's voice, that our own voices did not constitute the validity that needed to go into a publication. And to your point, Meca, I would agree with you 100% that when we started homeschooling in the early years, I certainly didn't want to write about it because I wasn't sure if I was going to be successful enough at it that someone else would want to hear my story. But what I realized is after our three kids, K through 12, homeschool high school, full rides to college, Spelman and Morehouse, full scholarships to college. By the time they graduate from college, mind you, now I think that I have enough confidence that, now there's a story worth writing. But the reality is, I think it was the failures along the homeschool journey that are equally value added in the chapter, right? Because families need to understand as you're homeschooling your child, you and your children are, by all intents and purposes, experiencing what we call action research. You're really participants in action research. Just like we try to encourage teachers to write about what they're doing in the classroom that's working or what doesn't work. Well, the reality is parents and homeschoolers, moms and dads, you are actual participants in studies within your own home. You are doing things that work, things that will work for others. And I think the beauty of coming together through the sister circles, through the writing monthly and weekly writing retreats, is that it afforded us a chance to give voice to our own experiences and to help decolonize what we believed the research was, right? Quantitative. We thought it was just, analysis of variance and regressions and correlations. But then there's such value in qualitative studies, because in the absence of those, huge data sets where you're running numbers and looking at, alpha levels, when you're listening to people and you listen to their stories and you listen to their experiences, it's such rich literature that I think that that's certainly an untapped market.
Yeah, definitely. But I really, I am proud of this work. I am proud of the process we use to get to the work. Now, it was our first book, so, it was, I don't know. I don't know if there were any challenges for you with that. It was our first time doing it, but I think that we're going to be better and better and better as we go along with creating more books. I don't want to miss this opportunity to talk about what Meca brought up earlier about the fact that you both represent rural home educators. And as you both know, I just completed data collection on a study of rural Black homeschooling. It's something that we haven't focused on. When you actually look at a research article or a research book or anything, we tend to focus on the city or the urban metro area experiences, but there's something unique about being a Black home educator in a rural setting. And one of the major findings for me was the isolation. I had 12 participants in this study, and none of them could refer me to another Black home educator in their city. Either they were the only one or they couldn't reach the other one. So we need to think more about the challenges of rural. Anything you all want to say about being a rural Black home educator? Oh, Irie says that's her struggle. Irie, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Irie, where are you?
I'm sorry, I was trying to type it in, it was taking too long.
Okay.
I'm in Kent, Ohio.
Ohio, okay.
Yeah, so I'm like between Akron and Cleveland. And so we can go to activities in different places. But even then, we're typically the only Black family.
Mm-hmm. That's the struggle. Do you all
I would say that's true here in Statesboro. I see a Black family who homeschools, but they don't live in Statesboro. They live in a neighboring rural community, but it's just the connection between us is minimal. We don't get together, and when we do see each other, it is at an event. And sometimes, we may see people at a different homeschooling event, but it's in Savannah or Atlanta or, in one of the metro areas. And I'm excited for those opportunities. And sometimes feel led to try to do something here in Statesboro, but sometimes I'm at a loss as to how to really reach out and to find them. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, but we have our, Facebook groups and we connect that way, but we don't really get together. And I think that we have some shared experiences in our journey in homeschooling and some of the issues with isolation. And within our community, the political issues are paramount. I mean, you can see differences between the Republican and Democrats. Mm-hmm. And I for some of them, I know that's one of the reasons that keep people isolated, because it's really loud and threatening here. So it's a crazy situation, but I think for our kids, at least to get out and do different things that are more I think, central to the rural identity in terms of getting out in the land. And my kids love the idea of farming and working with animals and doing that thing, but they really like some of the science behind it. So my oldest is into science projects with GMOs, and he's doing stuff in manufacturing and all that good stuff. And they enjoyed those aspects as well.
Wow.
So Meca, as you were chatting, I was thinking the exact same thing. There are a few things that I wrote on my little notepad regarding your question, Dr. Fields-Smith. I think unique, when you're a person of color in the rural South, I actually think it's quite ironic that there are few people of color homeschooling their children, because of the history of America and the treatment of people of color in the rural South. So it almost amazes me that it's not a stark contrast, in the sense that in the rural South, the connection to land certainly gives you the space to learn. My husband and I were chatting the other day about maybe doing a children's book entitled like The Backyard Zoo, because we've seen just a wealth of animals and wildlife just from our backyard. And then just a connection to land and the ancestral connection to land and what that affords from an educational perspective. It's just monumental. The other thing I would question and may raise for the conversation as to maybe, I'm not trying to know that, we're not, I'm not trying to surmise why there are only few Blacks who are homeschooling in rural America. But I can say in rural America, in the traditional public school setting, the opportunity cost of homeschooling, if you're Black, is being a part of an athletic team or the band. Because in rural America, sports and band and dance and some of those kinds of extracurriculars within the traditional school setting are like worth its weight in gold for some families. And so that could be the opportunity cost of families who want to homeschool, but what are the trade-offs of doing so if they have a child who wants to, play sports? I think another thing in terms of what is unique about being Black and homeschooling in rural America, I like that you mentioned isolation, but I think I'll try to package it a little differently, because as you already know, there's this misnomer that homeschool kids are isolated. That is not what you're saying. What I hear you saying is really that you are really in a class of your own. And that I think that there's been beauty in that, because since we've done it successfully, I now see that the fruits of our labor really have served as kind of a model for other Black families who otherwise would not have homeschooled. Now that we've done it successfully, I see that there are really other Black families who are saying, if they did it, we can do it too. And so I think that, while we're kind of the homesteaders, if you will, of the rural South and being Black and homeschooling, I do think that our efforts, and Dr. Fields-Smith mentioned it earlier, you see that the U.S. Census survey just came out, the household pulse survey, that homeschooling has increased from about 3.4% to about 16.1%. That's about a 500% or 405%, 100% increase. And so we know that Black families have finally said during the pandemic that, oh my goodness, there's an option. And that option is I can actually school my kid at home.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Wow. Yeah, this is very important to look at the differences in rural. And I haven't combed through all of the data yet, so I know there's more gems in there. But one of the issues that I have, I'm just racking my brain in how to, upscale that study to go from 12 to maybe 50. How do I find rural Black homeschoolers who want their stories told? That's the challenge. So I need to figure that out. And if anyone even has ideas, I'm willing to try anything. But let's open it up and see what questions anybody has. The book, we don't have a publication date yet, but it is in production, which means it's out of our hands. They are they're doing some copy editing, and they will send us what they call proofs. And Khadijah and I will have to go through those proofs, and what they do is they'll send us queries. Did you mean this, or should this be this, or this is missing? And so we'll have to do that process. And I have made it my priority to, as soon as they send the queries, I have nothing else pressing between now and the rest of the year, except the conference on homeschool research, but all of that is going to be set. There's nothing else I have to do except do it. So as soon as those queries come out, I'm getting them back to the publisher, because if we take a long time getting them back, then that will delay the actual publication date. And I want it to come out this year. So hopefully that will happen. Let's see what's going on in this chat. I've been engaging and trying to be in multiple places at once, and who knew I could multitask so well. So
Ari has a question. If I can maybe kind of attack that one. And Ari, thank you for that. As it pertains to secular homeschoolers, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that, full disclosure, so I'm a native Michigander. From Detroit, Michigan, but then we moved to a little small town called Cairo, Georgia in 1999. So I'm a city girl turned country girl. And I'm glad you brought up secular, because when we came here, the homeschool co-op that was in our area was the Christian homeschool co-op of regional Thomasville, right? And, just avid Christians, we prayed together, and then I started saying to myself, well, what if I'm not a Christian? I am, but what if I'm not? Where was there room for that? And it's funny because, we started kind of backing away a little bit, because, there was such an emphasis on Christianity, so much so that it almost became more important than, the education itself, right? And so I guess in many ways, that is the belief, but I think that it's important, as you're thinking about building your homeschool, that I always tell parents, come up with a mission statement, and whether that mission statement has religion as a central part of that, or community, or self-determination, or resistance, or whatever that is, it's important, I think, that it becomes something that you articulate, something that you operationalize through the work that you're doing, because it's easy for you to feel like you're homeschooling, and then one day, and then the next day, you kind of feel like you're a part of, more of a Christian community than, let's say a homeschool community, if I can say that properly. So, I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think that there's this belief that everyone who's homeschooling, is just this devout Christian, and there are no options to that otherwise. But I do think that having the freedom to homeschool your child helps you to also have the freedom to choose what religious or spiritual connection you want to have rooted in your child and help to develop in them. And you do have that choice, to lean in more or less as you deem necessary.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'd like to just add to that just a bit, because I think that's a real critical point, and something that really, I think, piqued my interest more when I was a graduate student, because when I was a grad student and I was working in research and working with families who were homeschooling, many of them would tell me, what brought them to homeschooling was their desire to follow a call from God. Mm-hmm. And to a certain extent, I understood what they meant. It was difficult for me to interpret, though, and write it in a way that was more acceptable in the research literature. Mm-hmm. So I was trying to figure out, okay, so now what ways can I find a different avenue to talk about this besides, God led you to this? And then as a parent, I'm also married to a minister. And for some reason in my head, I just wanted to debunk the idea of I'm homeschooling because I'm married to a pastor. I just had that stereotypical idea that we homeschool because it's our religion, we're fundamentalist, religious, and that's nowhere near the case. It's not the case at all. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of my overall issues, was like, I don't want people to think that's my position, because it's not. If I'm to homeschool, it's definitely about self-determination. It is my protest against some of the issues and the consistencies that I see in the miseducation of our children. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. But how do you get around all of that? I was at a quandary, but you just do it. You just do it. People are going to think what they want to think regardless. Yeah. But you just do it. But it is somewhat difficult to kind of walk across the tightrope in getting through what you want for your kid, and understand that Christianity or your religious beliefs are a part of who you are. It's going to come through regardless. Is it going to take a front seat or a back seat? That's basically up to the parent. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's going to be in how you present yourself. And you might even just tell your kids, like I tell mine, so today, this is the focus of what we're talking about, and this is where we're going. Tomorrow, it might be a little something different, but this is the focus. And I believe that they'll get it. You'll have an opportunity to tell them, these were our overall goals. Mm-hmm. And we believe that if we continue and be consistent and be patient, we'll get there. Mm-hmm. But it may not be having a firm grip or opportunity to discover who you are and your religious identity. That may not be your overall goal for your homeschooling experience. And it's okay to just say that.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. We have a question from Arden Santana. Thank you for sharing. Oh, you're welcome. Oh, so the writing writing workshops retreat that we did, they were virtual because of COVID. And it's something that Khadijah and I did for the authors, the 14 people who wrote chapters in our book. We wanted to create a community of writers. As of August 1st, I will be the graduate program coordinator for my department. I will be doing virtual retreats with my PhD students. And I don't know how many of them are going to sign up and do it. I'm going to do them virtual still. I thought they were successful virtually, and I'm going to keep doing that because of the variant, and where I live, it's rampant. So I'm staying in the house still. But what I will do is put a blurb out on the BFHES Facebook resource group. When I'm doing a retreat, if you want to join us, I will welcome you and let you know. And I might even just do one for anybody who wants to do that, because I think writing your stories is very important. And if you need help writing the proposal for your book, Khadijah and I are here for you. We will help you with that process. I mean, it's like, I want to give you access to publishing your story. So thank you, Amelia. Thank you. It's not a promotion. It's just more work. It's one of those deals. I'm working on the promotion though. We are just about at the end. If anybody has any final questions that you want to ask them now. You can unmute. I will, let me see. I'm going to remove the spotlight, put us on gallery. If you want to unmute and say anything as we finish up.
I was going to add, as always, if they have any social media or websites they can list so I can learn more.
Yes. You all want to type in, Meca and Kathaleena, type in your social media websites or anything? What I could do, let me drop the, so you can see the description of our book series. Let me drop that in too. That would be very important.
There are a few comments I wanted to share before we let go.
Okay.
One of the things I've been researching, just kind of trying to connect the work that we're doing in the book with some of the research literature is Malcolm Gladwell, who's a fantastic author who wrote a book called Outliers. Malcolm Gladwell introduces this concept called capitalization rate, which unlike the capitalization rate in the B school or real estate market that deals with kind of investors and return on investment, Malcolm Gladwell defines this thing called capitalization rate as the percentage of people in any given situation who have the ability to make the most of their individual potential. And the reason why I want to leave that with maybe my closing comments to the audience is that a part of homeschooling, it's more than just the act of doing it. The act of either taking your kid out of school, the act of never even putting your kid into, it's more than just the act. It's more than just the pedagogy and the culturally relevant curriculum. It is helping ensure that your children that you brought to this earth fulfill their fullest potential. And if your children are in a situation, a learning situation that is not allowing them to do that, then in order for us as a society at large to increase our capitalization rate, we have to create opportunities for them to be their best self. And for some children, probably the vast majority of children, that is going to be in an environment where they are, yes, I'll give you my hand, where they're around people who love and respect them and understand them. And so I just wanted to put that out there for those persons who are kind of connecting, trying to, maybe trying to understand the important role of schooling, as well as, thinking about how they may contribute to a future chapter.
Let me get Arden in. Go ahead.
I just had two comments. The first being around, I'm actually responding to, I think, Ebony, who was talking about, curriculum and it not being culturally relevant. So I'm a recovering public school teacher, homeschooler, and director of Sage Academy, for those that don't know me. And in both settings, public school and now, particularly the public school where I begin to employ this practice, we can take the curriculum is by definition just the course of materials you use to teach. I think we have to first be very clear about what curriculum is. So that's what classes, what subjects, the standards, or whatever it is, your objectives. So with that, you have the freedom and the flexibility as an educator, even those of us that are caught up in these schools, to choose the materials to teach those skills. The curriculum is only the classes, the objectives, the ideas and things you want to teach. We can choose the culturally relevant material for our children. So I just wanted to say that.
That's a great point.
That's simple. That's easy. We can accomplish that. This is one of the bigger issues that I just wanted to put out there for us to sort of think about. And as BFHES is so great at pulling folks together to try to solve our problems, our issues, the notion of the rural educators, the Black rural educators. I serve families in 3 states, Philadelphia, Connecticut, and Maryland. The places I love, the places that I call home, the places where my constituents come to me for support in educating their children. And one of the greatest challenges I find for myself personally is how is it that we can connect physically in one place to be able to better serve us in that context of the physical village that supports the children. And so this rural issue, it just brought that up again because it's bigger, it's beyond, everything is always beyond our own home. But we're spread out, we're all over the place. And how do we decide if we want to be in, Kentucky or Ohio or Pennsylvania but I just think it's something to consider and to give thought to about, our connectivity.
Arden, I'm going to take a shot at that. I know that we're about 4 minutes out.
Yeah.
There is an organization in Baton Rouge, the Black Home Educators Resource Institute. And when we first started, Arden, we got in the car and drove from South Georgia all the way over to Baton Rouge, because to your point, we were determined that our Black and brown kids needed to be around other Black and brown homeschoolers. And so I think that certainly that's something that a good point, because I think there's such value in physically being in the midst of other like-minded people of color.
Maybe one day this teaching will be in person. That would be fabulous.
No, it really would be. And I will say that for some of the early Black homeschoolers, you know, the Baton Rouge was the place to be. So yeah. I'm from Baton Rouge, and Joyce Burgess and Eric Burgess happen to be some close members, you know, family related members. And so my homeschooling journey actually was through that vicarious experience with them. But yeah, connection is increasingly or monumental to building your efficacy. If you don't have a real connection with somebody and you can't see the experience and their victories, even their failures, if you don't see that, it's very difficult for you to imagine and embrace it for yourself. Right. Especially when you don't see yourself as being you know, possibly succeeding in this way. That's why I think we have so many people who start and fail. It would be also good for us to have conversations with people who bring their kids back.
Listen, I need to end because I have to set up the next one and I'm late. And that presenter is probably running around looking for me. So I want to thank you all for engaging. We have 2 more authors again, I believe at 5 o'clock from the book. So we'll be able to pick up talking about it again. Meca and Kathaleena, if you would think about going to the marketplace in Ing so that people can find you. Okay.
Got it.
And with that, I'm going to end the recording. I thank you all for engaging, and I will see you soon in the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.